Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. My name is Bringy Dev, and on behalf of the IIMB Center for Management Communication, or CenComm, I thank you for being here with us this afternoon and sitting in on our webinar. I have the honor to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Dr. Deepti Ganapathy, who is Assistant Professor Communication at the Narsee Monjee Institute of Management Sciences at Bengaluru. Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Deepti. We really appreciate your taking the time to share with us your ideas on communicating change, which is the topic for this afternoon's webinar. To tell you a little bit about Dr. Ganapathy, she has earned a PhD in social media and communication and teaches at IIMS Bengaluru. Formerly a journalist for close on a decade, Dr. Ganapathy has a number of very significant achievements to her credit. Apart from being a member of the faculty at IIMS, she is also a professor at IIM Indore, and additionally, these last 3 years, Deepti has been one of visiting faculty at IIM Bangalore Executive Education Program, which is run for very senior government officials. Talking about her journalistic writing, she has covered a wide range of issues, including promoting sustainable cities, reality growth, civic infrastructure, women's issues, education, health, and travel, and has been published in the Times of India, Deccan Herald, and media such as CNN, as well as Nat Geo Traveler. While she was a media person, she was selected for the prestigious Group Study Exchange Program to New Zealand in 2009 by Rotary International. And one of her articles was nominated for the CNN Young Journalist Award 2007 as part of the Asia Pacific region territory. On the academic side, her research is focused on the use of social media for communication in both governance as well as brand building. Dr. Ganapathy is also the co-founder of INDEEP, a social enterprise that empowers rural children and teachers by introducing them to creative learning techniques. Additionally, these last 3 years, Dr. Ganapathy has been visiting IIM Bangalore, where she teaches in executive education for senior government officials. Ma'am, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon and for patiently waiting through my introduction. I will now hand you over to Dr. Deepti Ganapathy to talk about communicating change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dev, for that warm introduction and for inviting me to be a part of this initiative at the Center for Management Communication at IIM Bangalore. And it's a privilege to be introduced by you. Thank you. Welcome to all our participants who have joined us from different time zones and places. I'm looking forward to share my insights on this topic and the interactions that will follow. The webinar will be structured into 3 sections. In the first part, I will be telling you about the idea of change and its translation down the organizational structure. Is this change communicated at all, or is it assumed to be communicated by the top management? If you are receiving this information from the top management, how do you process it and decode it for your team members to feel deeply engaged and make your team feel deeply engaged? The second part of the webinar will take you through processes of this change with examples of real-life organizational stories. The third part of the webinar is where we will be engaged in a discussion with you as I listen to your experiences, the roadblocks, the challenges you have faced, and the initiatives that you have taken in this direction. So I've been very excited to be hosting and preparing for this webinar because I'm looking forward to the third part of this webinar where I can hear about the experiences really that you have had in the organizations where you have worked when these kinds of change come about and how you have dealt with it and what are the most innovative techniques especially using the latest forms of digital media that your organization has been able to really introduce to help you navigate this change is something that really excites me, and I'm looking forward to those discussions after my talk. So what is going to be the focus of this webinar is that you're going to learn what constitutes change, the problems that you will face when confronted with change, how to navigate yourself and lead your team through this phase, and think about solving these challenges with existing as well as fresh insights using communication tools and tactics. So at the end of this webinar, we will actually be reimagining the role and significance of upward communication in organizations. Okay, so the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus actually said that the only constant in life is change. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we understand that change is something that is constant, that is a process that organizations go through, a constant change and a life process that an organization goes through, the better it will be for us to adapt to the change, to learn how to cope with the change, and to find out tools and techniques to communicate this change. So really, change is a psychological phenomenon that we need to think about crossing. And I can really, talk about one experience that I had when I went on a Rotary group study exchange program to New Zealand in 2009. And as part of the club's initiative, we had to visit these Rotary clubs in Auckland City. And Auckland City has this, the North Shore and the south part of the city, which is divided by a harbor bridge, and we were told that some of the Kiwis, so Auckland has a population of just 1.4 million people, but many of them hadn't crossed that 30-mile long bridge, that 1,000-meter bridge, and they had not stepped out of their comfort zone, or they had not crossed that bridge because it was a psychological bridge for them. So it is a human tendency to, worry about crossing that bridge when a change happens, when we are faced or confronted with a change, when an organization decides to shake us up and say we have to cross that bridge and we have to make sure that the change occurs at distinct levels. But then as human beings, we get into this mode of shock, of denial, and then we slowly start adapting and adjusting to that change. So I just wanted to put what change is in context of these scenarios so as to prepare you for what kind of change we are talking about. Okay, so what constitutes change in an organization? What really constitutes change? So there can be different interpretations of change. The most major ones which really shake up the organization's core can be a merger or an acquisition, a restructuring or a downsizing, a response to regulatory change, facing new competitors, real or virtual I've put in because, artificial intelligence and robotics and all these things are something that organizations look as new competitors. And last but not the least, when there is a change in leadership, and that constitutes a big change for many organizations. So I will come back to this slide, and I'll come back when I discuss organizations that went through these processes. But for now, let me move on to the next slide. So what happens when a change takes place is that change is often communicated from the top management, and it's called top management communication. We call that, scholars point out to it as TMC, top management communication. And if you see the the circle on the left, the middle level managers, who I'm sure most of you are middle level managers who joined in this webinar, because this was my target audience, and in my talk I'm addressing this group of people so they can understand how they become the I showed you the picture of that bridge, so they become the important link in that bridge between the top management and the frontline employees. And at the intersection of the communication between these three groups lies the impact factor, or that's where the communication is really going to matter. It's going to be effective if conversations are happening between all these three levels of employees in an organization. Okay. So if we look at change, which is a strategy that organizations adopt as a center stage, communication strategy is a center stage or is the centerpiece of that change strategy. So it takes over that change strategy, and that's why it becomes very, very important for organizations to understand that change without communication in the true sense cannot percolate or cannot bring about the transformation that organizations are looking for when they are communicating about change. So how do employees react to change? Is something that we need to think about here, because that's where you come in, and that's where your insights are going to matter, and that's how you are going to understand the problems and deal with it in being that link on that bridge between the top management and your team members or the front level employees. So if we look at reorganization, maybe you are confused or you are not certain of what is happening there. If you look at acquisition, maybe cynical, maybe do not, again, understand the situation. In the case of a merger, fear, but studies point out that whenever there is a merger, both parties, for instance, both parties of the organizations that are merging together do encounter the same kind of emotions. Okay, so probably fear, whether your job is going to, you're going to be laid off, whether you're going to have to acquire new sets of skills, all these lead to that fear factor coming in there. Okay, and yeah, so new product lines, maybe it leads to skepticism, and leadership change, which leads to curiosity. That is, you're trying to wonder what's happening, or showing some kind of a curiosity here. Okay, I just have to 1 second just get on the chat. I think there's a window popping up here with a video of somebody. So how do I mute that, Sushma? Sorry to stop in between, but
hello. Yeah.
I can't hear you. I can't. There was some video which popped up of one of the participants.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So coming back to these emotions that you can see when we talk about the reactions to change. These emotions are something that you have to deal with when you manage a team, because the top management has set their communication process into motion, and you have to now assimilate what kind of information is coming from there. You have to deal with the downward flow of communication while your own team members, your own employees are trying to understand what's happening, and they are displaying these emotions of being confused, cynical, fear. They are showing skepticism. They are curious. They want to know what this information means to them, and that's where it becomes critical for you as a manager to listen to all these emotions that are coming out and to understand how to make sense of this emotion and put it in perspective for the employees concerned. Okay, so what happens when employees react to change? Okay, so or what happens when the top management is not communicating enough? So just sending out a message which they think you have to decode appropriately and you have to inform the other employees, then they are not communicating. Communication doesn't become a two-way process there. So what happens when this not communicating phenomenon occurs is that employees go into a period of high stress and uncertainty. They have a lot of stress and anxiety, and they try to fill up that void with rumors. And that is a situation that can become a little dangerous, because for you to cope with these kind of high stress employees, anxious employees who are also trying to fill up the void that is created because of the lack of communication with rumors, is a situation that you have to encounter during a process of change, and that is where your understanding of this entire phenomenon becomes very, very critical. Okay, now I'll go back to a little bit about what organizations have done first with some case studies, and then I'll go back to the concept so that you can really relate to what I have tried to say till now. So let's start with a good example. Let's start with an example of communication that has happened in an organization where the outcomes have been good. Let's talk about some successful case studies first and put a little positivity into this phenomenon before we talk about the ones which didn't go well or which didn't work. So at General Electric, the former CEO of General Electric, Jeffrey R. Immelt, writes in the Harvard Business Review that one weekend a month, and I quote, one weekend a month, a GE officer and his or her spouse would have dinner with my wife Andrea and me at our home. Next morning, I'd spend 4 hours talking to him or her. Tell me, what's important in our business? What do you think we should do? What are you working on? What else do you want to do? So he would ask the manager these questions the next morning, and he would want to hear their feedback because he had worked in the front lines himself. He had been a salesperson and had worked on the field. So he knew the importance of listening to these conversations from the managers, from the frontline employees, and after he became the CEO, he made this initiative possible to have one weekend a month meetings with an officer. So many organizations today, it's not only GE, there are other organizations which are talking about having these candid conversations. And for instance, once a month, 10 employees are invited to have lunch with the CEO in a very informal setup. They can ask questions, and also there is another organization where an employee can interview a CEO, and this interview is videotaped and everybody can watch the video. So what happens when these kind of conversations are shown in the organization? Employees start feeling a sense of engagement. So as managers, now here you come in. As managers, you should grab such opportunities to network, to make these kind of leadership and CEO initiatives matter. You must grab such opportunities because today leadership and CEOs are valuing these perspectives they might not get otherwise. This gives you the chance to become an important driver in this change and build deeper connection. So remember the slide where I showed you that you are the change agent. You have to become that link on that bridge. So these kind of opportunities are something that you must grab because you are an important driver and your voices matter. Okay, so one example of what GE did was the Go Direct strategy, where they would engage the employees directly without any formal channels, and GE Voices, where every employee's opinions mattered. So they had a very interesting social media setup which they used for both the Go Direct strategy and GE Voices. Another strategy they adopted was open office spaces, and all these helped build these candid conversations that they kept stressing on, and they continue to stress on this today. So that's why I thought I'd put the GE case study here and show you how the outcomes ultimately become a continuous learning for the organization, and this is accepted across locations, intercultural teams to benefit from these kind of strategies. Now remember, I showed you that the types of change, and we saw acquisitions and mergers. So one such example was when HP and Compaq merged in 2002. So when in 2007, Michael Mendenhall joined HP as the Chief Marketing Officer and Senior Vice President of Corporate Marketing following a crisis when HP merged with Compaq in 2002 and struggled to consolidate its brand identity and culture. Their focus was on engagement. So they asked the question, how can we create the right message and the right level of engagement? And this is what organizations are looking for when they really have these kind of changes that happen at a significant level. Larkin in one article in the HBR observed nearly 2 decades ago, this was in 1996, they observed that when there was a massive wave of downsizing, companies failed to listen, to hear what frontline workers have been trying to tell them. And that's why it is important for you to become those change agents and become that link between, I keep stressing this again and again because it is important for you to know where you are in that process of change when it happens and how your communication matters at that point in time. Okay, so moving on now. We will talk about another case study, where a manufacturing company tried to, during a change process, tried to roll out the 3 T's, namely trust, teamwork, and tomorrow. So what happened was they had these mugs and caps and pens where they had these 3 T's written on them, and they talked about the change and how it was coming and how they wanted employees to believe that they mattered. But when the employees came back to their desks, they found that the union leaders had kept letters there which talked about the management snooping on them with cameras, and they said even the event where the launch of the 3 T's happened had these cameras monitoring you. So when organizations actually they preach, they have to practice what they say. They have to really walk the talk, and that's important because when a study was conducted on 4 organizations that went through this kind of change, it was found that feedback was not taken. And feedback helps to improve performance, it helps to reduce uncertainty, to enhance one's self-image, and to manage self-presentation goals. So organizations fail to see that when they start communicating, they have to get a feedback, and you as managers become those agents, become those facilitators of this feedback, because you will be listening to your employees who are going through those emotions that I showed you, fear, of anxiety, of stress, of uncertainty, not knowing how to cope with change. And that's where it becomes critical for you to give that feedback to your manager, to your senior manager, and he will give it back to the top management in order to understand how that change has been implemented, how it is going to go about in the organization. So organizations have to use measurement tools and they should use tools that can provide good analytics. Okay, so another incident or another case study that I'd like to bring up here is the Continental Airlines case study. Where Gordon Bethune, the former CEO, as you can see him on the picture, he was one day walking around, the facility, the airline facility, and he saw that the employees were wearing the T-shirt of Continental Airlines, but they had torn out the part where the logo of the airlines was, and so he asked them, why is the logo not to be seen? So one guy said, when I go to the supermarket this weekend, I don't want to be seen as an employee of Continental Airlines. And that was the situation then. So when he came into the organization, he came up with this go forward plan where he decided to go from the culture of don't tell anybody unless absolutely required to tell everybody everything. So he and his team, the top management team, they hung around in the hangars in the airports. They loaded bags, they stood alongside ticket agents, and they talked. What did they talk about? They talked about their plans, they talked about cultivating honesty, trust, dignity, and respect. And this, entire case study has been quoted again in HBR, where really documented well. And it is an interesting case study to show how, like I kept referring back to the GE story, these candid conversations matter. And where do you come in again? It is you who is going to be talking to the top management when they come around and want to be seen everywhere with you and hear what's happening, so that they are trying to tell you what the message really about the change is and how one has to respond to that change while showing a high level of participation and engagement there. Okay, so another example that I want to share with you is, I really can't quote the company here, but there is this public utilities company which has hired a new CEO, and the CEO is really trying to bring in a lot of change by having again these kind of candid conversations. He's brought in few strategies like having an anonymous web chat, so employees can talk about what this reorg means to them, how they are coping with it, and they can really vent out their frustrations and emotions there, all the while the top management is listening and understanding how this change has been perceived by the employees, how they are going to react and respond to change. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to have these meetings with the managers, and the managers in turn have to get a lot of information from their employees, from their team members, and convey it back to the top management to give them the feedback that they are looking for. So the measurement tools really that organizations can use today are if the CEO is, for instance, putting out a weekly blog about this change and what it means, the organization can monitor how many people are reading these blogs, how is it actually being read, or if the CEO is sending an email, is it being forwarded down to the managers, or is it stuck in the inbox of the senior manager and not getting forwarded? So these simple techniques to measure communication are not followed even in some leading organizations or big organizations, and that's where the information flow is not reaching down about communicating that change. So if this information is collected, you can really, as managers, be able to give insights about how individuals in your team are learning new roles, how are they interpreting this program or this change, and what are their reactions to these changes in work. So you have to tell all these discussions that you have with your team members, with your employees. You have to understand how they are reacting to this change and communicate it back to the top management so that you create good listening systems and create a two-way evaluation and feedback channel. And this can revitalize a dying change program and reinvent poorly operationalized programs. Another airline that I want to talk about, since we are in the airline industry, is the Delta Airlines restructuring in 1994. Now, what Delta Airlines did was they had this newspaper called Delta Newsline, and on Delta Newsline, they announced this major restructuring, and they received 6,000 calls on the day of the announcement itself and 14,000 calls that week. And within that week, what the top management did was they held a lot of these hanger meetings. They hung around with employees and kept relentlessly providing them information quickly and accurately, and that's where it became a success story, and that change could be incorporated without employees feeling left out, without them feeling that, oh, we were not a part of this change, or we were not communicated really and did not understand what this change was all about. So through these case studies, what I want to really portray in this picture is there is this, session that I do for my students called the corporate blindfold, where I ask, it's just how it's depicted in the picture. So it's the CEO here who is not blindfolded, but all his employees are blindfolded, and he has to lead them through a process or a situation of uncertainty, because change, I said, is really uncertainty that an organization is facing. So in this game called Corporate Blindfold, when we have our debriefing session after the game, I ask my students, so when you stumbled, when you hit that trash can and fell, or when your knee bumped against the desk in the classroom, who held you up? Who showed you the way when you were not able to see? How much pressure did that person exert on your hand? And how did he change your direction? How did he align you to taking you forward to the way the rest of the team was headed? And this is that process of change, of communicating change that has to happen. Remember, communication, most of the communication is non-verbal. So what happens in this game is that through non-verbal communication, the leader is actually leading all his employees towards where he wants to take them. So it's a very similar situation to what is happening in organizations when change occurs, when different types of change occurs, that sometimes the top management themselves have no clarity or no real idea of how the change is going to pan out. Because we live in complex times, we live in uncertain times, competition is so great that organizations do not really know where they are going or what kind of clear vision they need to take the organization forward. Every day has to be evaluated, and then the decisions are taken. So in such an uncertain scenario, reducing uncertainty and making employees feel that they have the trust and they have the integrity and the values required to come forward is what is required in such a scenario. And that's where the relationship between the communication medium, the medium that is used to communicate, and the effectiveness matters. And when I say medium and communication effectiveness, today with digital media, today with so many platforms available, a lot of organizations, especially in internal communications, are using good tools and techniques to keep their employees engaged. And the focus today is more moving from a leaner medium of communication to a richer. And when I say rich context, it is more of a face-to-face communication because it has the ability to handle multiple information cues simultaneously, facilitating feedback and establishing a personal focus. So as managers, again, this is how you can come in, and that is when you establish a personal focus, where you can have face-to-face interactions with your employees, with your team members, and in that face-to-face interaction, the context of communication becomes very rich because you are not only listening, but you're also able to make them feel that they are being listened to, and that what they are saying or what they are communicating matters. So again, just to re-emphasize my point of the upward communication and reimagine it, as middle-level managers, you are the key communication links. So organizations, of course, the top management should realize this and make you accountable for keeping your employees informed. And they can do this, the top management can do this when they encourage you to become those key informants, when they train you with through the help of, for instance, there is a person called a change manager in organizations. I remember when I just visited the US recently, there was this organization that was going through a change, and they had hired a change manager. So the manager can reach out to the change manager, who is actually an expert from outside the organization, and can use him or her as a mentor to understand how to communicate that change. So because the person is from outside or is not a part of the process, he or she can give a few valuable insights which are very objective and will help the manager realize the situation and realize the techniques and the tools of communication that he can use. So the change manager also communicates this back to the top management communication, that the manager gave this kind of feedback. He or she is having problems with his team because the team is feeling very anxious about the uncertainty, feeling very stressful about the situation, about the reorganization. So in this manner, training can be given and expert opinion can be sought. If the top management realizes that the middle-level managers are the ones who can become those key communication links, because then they can make them accountable to keep employees informed, and this leads to good interpersonal communication. So managers need to be inspired. They need to have these feelings of confidence, of competence. And a study analyzed 10 management books that talked about communication during change. And the study found that in these management books that talked about communication during change, there were 3 major themes that emerged, and that was promoting communication and participation, facilitating the process of change, and creating a vision, and that's where managers can come in. So managers can also, when listening to employees, understand these 5 questions, which was proposed by Cutler and Ulrich in a study which asks, why is change necessary? What exactly is changing? What is changing for me? How can I support the change, and what happens if I do not join in? When and how will I find out the progress? So these questions could be the questions that your employees or your team members will ask you, and that's how they react to change. And that is where it becomes very important for you to keep them, participatory in this conversation, to keep them from not losing focus of where the organization is headed to, and what is the relationship that exists between top management communication, employee involvement, and the organizational commitment. And here, the role of trust comes in as a mediator. So this is actually in line with social exchange theory, which says that although organizations expect employees' commitment to its values and goals in exchange for top management communication, it makes itself vulnerable to employee action. And so the trust factor becomes a mediator in this process of communication. Davidson in a study claims that today everyone with the title of manager in one form or the other has to be a change manager. So there your role as a change manager matters. That's where your role is going to be significantly critical in order to establish yourself as that change manager. Okay, so I have put this picture of a golfer because in golf, as they say, the shot is played in the mind. And so when you are faced with situations such as a change in weather conditions on the greens, it shouldn't matter to you because in your mind you've already played that shot. You have that focus, you have that drive, and you have that skill to play that shot. So as managers, in your mind, you should have embraced change, and only then you will be able to lead your team or motivate your team to embrace that change. And then hitting that shot will not be a difficult challenge for you. Research also indicates that a higher level of participation and engagement leads to a positive response to change, and that's where your role as managers becomes critical to help your employees team members participate in that change, engage them in that change, tell them that, today this is what we know and this is how we can deal with it, and this is what we need to do. So you have to keep the informal channels of communication open and help them respond positively to change in these situations. So having said that, I know that now you can say that you have understood the context of the change with the examples that I have provided. That is, if you have understood what the context of change is, what the top management communication involved, then you can decode that message and make it understandable to your team members, to your employees. Once you do that, you analyze your audience and how they are affected by this change. So when audience analysis is very important for communication to be measurable, and that's why it is important to ask those probing questions, ask those right questions to your team members. How are you feeling? Why are you feeling this way? Why are you feeling fearful of the reorganization? Why are you not ready to take on extra responsibility if the team is downsized? What are the challenges for you? Why are your skill sets not competent enough? Why do you feel that if there is a downsizing that is going to occur, all the work is going to come and land up on your desk? What are your challenges? So analyze your audience and understand how they are getting affected by this change, and then you will be able to give back that feedback to your top management, and you will be able to understand why your team members are feeling that way about change, and that will lead you to planning better strategies. Using innovative channels and messages to communicate. For instance, you can have lunch meetings. You can plan for these town hall meetings. You can have a lot of these initiatives that organizations today are having in internal communication in order to make internal communication really informal, really open. I mentioned the anonymous web chat earlier on. Right, and these kind of mechanisms can be incorporated when I talk of innovative channels. You can have a flip chart where you ask your employees to use different color markers or different scents of markers, which will again show their emotion. If they are feeling angry, they'll probably use red. If they're feeling calm, they'll probably use a blue, and these can become feedback mechanisms for you to understand what your employees are going through. So use innovative channels and messages to get feedback, to elicit feedback. It's all about timing. So when a change happens, when there is uncertainty, the timing matters. Like I showed you in the example of the Delta Airlines case. Within a week, they were able to elicit feedback fact, they were able to go on the hangars and hang around with the employees and time the communication so that that change was percolating to the last employee there. Okay, and monitoring, I've discussed that as well, that if the CEO is sending out a weekly blog about that change, how many people are reading it? What is the feedback? So the HR or the change manager can come back to the CEO and say that these are the concerns that we have, you need to address. So in the next week's blog, probably the CEO can talk about those concerns. And how does he get to know about this? When you as managers communicate that, look, I do not know what is happening. This is what my employees are worried about. What do I tell them? How do I go about this? So when you're called for meetings with the top level management, go prepared with a lot of questions. And how do you go prepared is when you yourself have had many meetings with your team members, have understood their concerns, and you can raise these concerns when the time comes for you to sit and have the discussion with the top management. Okay, so that's how your role really pans out during communication in times of uncertainty. Now, this picture really depicts a CEO landing with his parachute, bringing in a wave of change. He's thinking he's arrived. He has brought in a major reorg. He's going to bring a big change in culture, etc., etc. But when he lands, that entire canvas of that parachute blankets everyone, and he assumes that by blanketing everyone, he has covered everyone with his communication, but employees feel they're shrouded in darkness. Okay, so that's the mismatch, that's the gap in communication. So when the top management assumes that when all the information is conveyed, it covers all employees. However, research has shown that employees would rather receive communication from their immediate supervisors than from the top management communication. Again, here your role becomes very important as managers, because you have to start ensuring that you know what information to convey to your employees when this kind of a change occurs, because that's where you hone your interpersonal skills and you use different mechanisms to communicate this change. So top management communication patterns and uncertainty were studied as a research topic among 404 members, top management communication members in 32 firms. And this found out that the manager's inability to predict how the change is going to pan out was due to a lack of sufficient information. So what should the communication networks actually do? How networks get established when the top management communication occurs in formal and informal channels? Patterns of communication emerge, and these evolve into communication networks, and that creates a communication density. Okay, when I say density, you can understand from the meaning of the word. It becomes very dense. It becomes a lot of networks emerge. And prior research has established that network density and communication centrality establishes performance effects, and this leads to greater productivity than those with sparse networks. Okay, so critical to communicate information is the failure to share information has a negative impact. When employees receive formal communication during uncertainty, they formulate their own ideas about what a change means and its purpose. And these messages are decoded, circulated, and recirculated in the organization. So what does this mean? Okay, so another example that I want to bring in here is the famous company, the automotive company, Chrysler, where the former executive director, Michael Morrison, said, when we implemented changes, the importance of simple principles such as tell your people first were learned. The management felt it was important for people to focus on the common mission of the company, to use the tools of continuous improvement, and most importantly, to enthusiastically embrace change. And that's the takeaway for for us to enthusiastically embrace change, whatever it is, whatever the change is. And for you as managers, it becomes important to help embrace that change. So in high uncertainty environments, there is a high level of ambiguous information going on, and that creates a cause and effect relationship. Hence, difference in managers' perceptions, if not communicated, could lead to confusion. Confusion could lead to conflict. And that's why it's important for upward communication in organizations to happen. So upward communication was discussed as far back as in the 1950s. And upward communication of strategic ideas from middle managers is closely related to a novel perspective on the strategic process. Not only top management, but middle managers too play a significant role in this process of strategy formation. And this was a study was conducted among 21 Japanese firms, which found that ideas and opinions tend to be voluntarily sent up by middle-level managers. And that's where it becomes important again for top-level managers to understand how and why middle-level managers matter and why their ideas and opinions matter during times of uncertainty. So last but not the least, what I want to reiterate my point here is do not hesitate to reach out to top management communication networks to dispel rumors if you're not certain what kind of information is to be conveyed to your team. Reach out to them for clarification. Do not encourage negative behavior, but let your team know that they have to embrace change. Reach out for expert advice. I mentioned this earlier. There are change consultants available. Reach out to the HR. Have skip level meetings if your immediate manager is not able to give you the information or cannot handle the situation himself. Have a skip level meeting with his senior, and continuously groom your team to change their mindset. You yourself first have to embrace change, and only then will you be able to make your team realize the importance of embracing change rather than not coping with uncertain times. Okay, so with this, I think now we will come to an end of this webinar. Thank you for listening. Now, let me take a few questions before we wind up.
Thank you, ma'am. Participants can raise the question in the chat window. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat window. Hello all, could you please put your questions in the chat window? If you have any questions, please put in your questions in your chat windows. And then you can either put it to the host directly or to all participants. Okay. Ma'am, you there?
Yes, Sushma.
We have a question from Nishanta. So in this VUCA world, don't you think change is the only constant? Hello?
Yes, so that's what I started my slide with, that thought, right? I said change is the only certainty. So what's the role of social media in communication change? It would be great if you could say in the organization. Yes, so again, social media, I would like to take this question because social media is my research topic as well. The role of social media in communicating a change is again a double-edged sword because first, the internal stakeholders, the internal communication within the organization has to occur effectively before that change is communicated to the external world. So employees start feeling a sense of angst, or they will not like it if they have to hear about change from an outside source. How would you feel when you're working in an organization and you come and then you feel, and then somebody else tells you that there's a change while you were working for so long in the organization and you did not know that. So a lot of our case studies, a lot of our examples show that, if employees hear about this change from outside, they do not like it, or they lose trust. That's why the role of social media can be harnessed only once the change has been communicated and has been accepted internally, and then it can be communicated to external stakeholders. So that's where the role of social media is going to really play out. So it's because it can also spread a lot of negative rumors, and it could lead to unnecessary problems for the organization to deal with. So, or the organization should put out, through its official social media pages only, it should talk about this change, and it should talk about it relentlessly and engage with all stakeholders. It could be internal and external stakeholders. But it should be a one point of contact. It should be only communicated through the organization's own official social media pages. For instance, GE has its official social media page through which all the communication happens. So a lot of organizations are using this. Okay. So I'll take another question here. I think this question addresses that, how social media how can it be controlled or responded to the negativity. I think I've responded to that question as well in just now. So what are the tools for measuring impact of change? So today, with a lot of analytics we do have a lot of tools to measure impact of change, but I think we should focus here more on the content, on the message itself. So that has to be thought through, and communication is a very measurable, component. So if you have your objectives clear, you have your objectives specific, you have a measurable outcome there in your objectives. It's very easy to measure the outcomes. And today, with a lot of tools I mentioned, for instance, a simple tool like tracking the email ID or the emails that are sent from the top management. Is it reaching everyone down the organization structure? Or is it stuck in somebody's mailbox? That person has forgotten to forward it or has forgotten to inform. These simple tools are not being monitored effectively. Forget about the advanced analytical tools that are there today to measure this impact. So just to see how is the message getting communicated. And I talked to you also about the feedback mechanism, how important it becomes to measure feedback, to know if that change is understood, is being decoded correctly, because each person will, for instance, make sense of it in a different way. So did he actually understand what the change was about? Is that understanding in tune with or aligned with the communication or the organization's goals? That's something that needs to be measured, and that can be measured again maybe through focus group discussions, through a lot of meetings that the manager can have, a lot of interpersonal face-to-face meetings that can happen, and the grapevine. So I forgot to mention here, but grapevine can be used if you really understand how grapevine, that is the informal communication, the rumor can spread. Because, for instance, there was this organization where I think it was Chrysler where the CEO went in and anonymously started fielding questions in the what is that? The room where customers call in the helpline room. So he went there and anonymously he started fielding questions from customers. And the chief corporate communications officer said he came to know about this from the employees who were there. And they were so thrilled that the CEO himself was fielding questions and he was responding. And this message was circulated. And again, in one presentation that the same CEO sat in, he said, okay, I don't want to see all these figures. Let's just talk about the quality of our cars. Let's talk about that. So these actions that were performed got spread more effectively inside the organization, and employees would see for themselves that the CEO was walking the talk, and he himself was passionate about the change, passionate about the reorg, and so tapping into these grapevine kind of communication channels also could be a way to measure impact. I'll take another question here. Yes, for this is a very relevant question. For large MNCs, even the middle-level managers are in dark most of the time about the change happening. How can they make sure that they have a clear idea of the change happening and all the relevant information present with them, which they can communicate clearly to their subordinates? So I mentioned, I answered this question also in my presentation. I said that yes, you are in the dark sometimes because most probably even the top management doesn't know what they're doing quite well. They do not have it in black and white. They're going to play it accordingly. It is going to evolve. It's going to grow as the change keeps panning out. So during these times when you yourself do not have a clear idea of what is happening, it is quite fair to tell your employees that this is honestly what information I have, this is how much I know, and having said that, this is what we can make sense of it. So don't shut out your employees or say that I do not have the information, how can I communicate it to you? So in a very informal way, try to be very honest with them, tell them that this is the information you know, but you will find out more eventually, but listen to them all the while, understand why they are worried about not having this information, what are their concerns, and when you get the opportunity, like I said, I mentioned how organizations today are having these informal meetings, 10 managers having lunch with the CEO, you getting invited for an interview with the CEO. So grab these opportunities and have your questions ready to ask the top management when you are asked to have these interactions with them. And that's where you become those change agents, okay? Then another question is about the time factor, right? The ideal time frame for communicating any change. The ideal time frame, for instance, I gave you the example of the public utilities company, which has a new CEO who's from the private sector and how he's trying to bring about a big shift in the culture, big reorg that's happening. So he wanted to do it in about 3 to 6 months time, but he encountered so much resistance because it was a public services company and because the managers were all the time through the downward communication, telling him that this is what our employees are feeling, this is how anxious or stressful they are, we do it slowly. So in this case, they have slowed it down to 6 to 9 months to a year maybe. So it does take time, and if you can clearly see that the management wants to hear everyone's perspective and they want everybody to be a part of this change, then you should, as a manager, try to tell this to the top management about these roadblocks that you are facing and how you should overcome them. Another question that I'd like to take here is this: should a manager have a friendly, informal role within the team to embrace change, or should a formal, standardized way be followed? Which one can have a more positive or negative impact? I would say it should, formal way is already happening from the top management to your level, the formal way is occurring. So you should have a more friendly, informal role within your team, and you should be able to facilitate that change. And it is going to have a positive impact on your employees, because everybody today is going in for that informal route. But at the same time, you should be assertive enough. For instance, if there's one employee always negative, always trying to, bring down the team's mood and spirit, then you should probably take him out and have a one-to-one interaction with him and tell him that his negative behavior is impacting the team. So you could be a little assertive there in your communication style, but overall have a friendly, informal role within the team to help them, because it's a difficult time. It's a tough time for everyone to embrace change. Like I told you, it's a psychological thing. We meet change with denial, with shock, then we adjust, then we adapt. But the human mind can adopt. It's amazing. We can cross that bridge. And that's why, it's important to have that empathetic nature in this moment when everybody is having a tough time coping with change. Next question, should a manager, I think I've taken this question. Any other questions? I think Sushma, can we?
Hi, ma'am. There's no other questions. Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this information, and it was an energetic session. Thank you so much. On this note, we will be closing the session today, and the session is archived in IIMBA.org. You can just go and hear again. Thank you so much, ma'am. Happy weekend to all of you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, participants. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Recording stop. Recording. Stop.